Hi, this is Sharan. Welcome to my channel. Today in this video we are going to see about index as well as selection and assignment in Pandas for a particular data frame. So before going into the details of the topic that we are going to cover, the fun fact for today is about biomass. So biomass is estimated based on the population multiplied by the average weight. So the biomass for humans is estimated to be about 300 million tons, I guess, maybe tons or should be tons. And it seems that the biomass of ant is about 10 times more than humans. So that was something that was shocking to me. Didn't expect the biomass of an ant to be much more higher than humans. Okay, having said that, so now in today's topic we are going to see how to select the various subset of a particular data frame by making use of index as well as by making use of the columns and by making use of combination of index as well as the various columns, and how we can filter based on values of a particular data frame, like maybe how to filter based on the age or city or whatever it is, depending upon the data frame that you are going to work on. It is really important that to understand these concepts, because while doing an real life data science project, we might have to filter various data, various subsets, and to understand better about the behavior of those subsets. So that's it we are going to see today. Let's get into the tutorial video. So the first one is, as I explained previously, we need to import Pandas library if we are going to make use of the Pandas in our on our data. So what I'm going to do is, before starting the execution, I'm just going to clear all the output. Okay. So now we are going to import the Pandas library. So as I have mentioned previously, if you have any error while executing this particular statement, maybe it is because the Pandas library is not installed properly. So maybe you need to close this window, go back to the anaconda command prompt, and do a pip install pandas and ensure that the pandas library is installed properly. And if you start Jupyter notebook, this should be all right. Now I'm going to just go forward and read the data. So we have seen enough about reading the data from different sources in our previous session. So I'm just going to read the data, and so this is a new data set. So maybe to just give a context about what this data is about. So what I have done is I have downloaded this data from the search trend from Google. So I have used all these terms and what has been the trend score for all these terms over the last 5 years, week by week. So this is the data that we are going to make use today, maybe as well as for the next few sessions. So let's get into the code, and then let's see how we can select a particular column, how we can make various selections based on the name of the column, as well as using the index, and how we can do assignments as well, like assignment operators as well. So the first one is, we can select a particular, from this data frame, we can select a particular column. So in order to select a particular column, there are two ways to do it. So one is by using dot. So by using dot weight. So when I execute this one, so as you see here, so what happens is the first column, so which is the column named weight, is being selected here. So as you see, I can change the name of the column, and accordingly the selection would change. So now we are displaying all the attributes from the column e-learning. So this is the trend score for this particular search term for a particular date. So these are all the topics that I have used, and it has the various trend score on a particular weight for those terms. So this is how we select a particular column in a data set. So let's see how to do this selection by the other methods. So instead of mentioning the name of the column after dot, we can mention that within a square bracket and within a quotes. So here, so this is very similar to what we did previously. We are going to select the column that is named weight from the data that is named as trend underscore data. So here, if you see, so I'm reading the data from the CSV, and it's been assigned to this particular variable trend underscore data. So let me execute this one and then show you what's happening. So as you see here, so again the column named wheat is being printed. So as you see, there are about 261 rows here. Let's continue and then see what are all the other operations that can be done for selecting a particular value. So now let's say we have selected a particular column. So this particular column, it displays all the values in that particular column, but let's say we want a particular item to be displayed. So we want the column wheat and we want the first element of that particular column. So we use this particular way to write the code. So what we mention is, we first mention the name of the column that needs to be selected, and second, in this square bracket, we mention the element that needs to be selected. So by executing this, what happens is the first element of the column wheat is being selected here. So if you see here, the first element is 20th of September 2015. So maybe let's see, if I increment the value by 1, let's see what happens. So if I increment the value by 1, if you see, it's the 27th of September, which is the second element. So on, like I can select whatever element that I would want to using by passing the name of the column as well as the index which we want to pick up. So apart from this, the other method is we can use .loc in order to select the various values from a particular data frame. So let's say I execute this one. So now what happens is, we select the column that is named wheat, and by an empty colon, what it means is, it means all the rows in that particular column will be displayed. So here we use .loc method to display all the rows of a particular column named wheat. So if I print it, so we can clearly see all the elements of that particular column is being displayed in order. So it comes up with the index. The index starts with 0 and it goes on till 260. So index will be incremented by 1, like by default, with every additional row. And we also get the name of the particular column, what is the length, and the data type. And moving on to the next one, let's say now we know how to select a particular column. Let's say we want to select few columns. So this will be really useful in a particular project. So let's say we have multiple data sources, like multiple data frames, and we want to select only a particular columns from each of those data frames, and then let's say we want to combine them. So then in that case, what we do is we use this kind of a code in order to select the specific columns that we want to. So what we are doing here is we use the same data frame trend_data. We use a .loc method, and what we do is, the first one is about the rows. So what we are, by simply mentioning the colon here, we would be displaying all the rows. So here within the square bracket, we pass all the name of the columns that needs to be selected. So now when I execute this one, what happens is the column wheat as well as data science is selected here, and it comes up with the index. So we don't filter it by the rows. So all the rows of these two columns are being displayed. So since all the number of elements is about like 261, so what happens is it will break in between. So it displays only the top 5 as well as the bottom 5 in our string. But as such, what happens is this particular script or this particular code will have the entire value in it. So when we try to write this into an CSV file, we would have the complete data set, like in all rows, like from index 0 till 260. So now moving on, so now we have seen how to make selection by a column, like different ways to select a particular column by using dot method, by specifying within a square bracket, by using .loc. So now what we want to do is we want to specifically select the rows as well as column of a particular data frame. So we still continue to use .loc. So what we do is, by executing this one, so as you see, what happens is the first one. So now so far what we were doing was we were just giving an colon. So now instead of colon, we are passing the rows that needs to be selected. So this is the index. So these are the rows with these index will be selected, as well as these two columns would be selected from our data frame. So as you see, the column wheat as well as data science is selected, as well as the rows with index 0, 1 and 2 are being selected. And moving on, we will slightly go into the details. So now let's say we want to select a range of rows. So instead of just specifying each and every individual index manually, we want to specify a particular range, and we want to print and see what's happening in that particular range. So when I execute the next one, so now what happens is we are passing on the specific rows that needs to be filtered. So here in this case, when we use .loc method, so from row 250 to row 260, including 250 as well as 260, will be fetched, and these two columns are being fetched. So if you see here, the index 250 as well as index 260, so including both of them, all the values are being fetched. There is one more method called as iloc, as you see here. The difference between these two is, in case of iloc, the last element will not be printed. It's something similar to what we have seen so far in a list, while displaying the values of a list. So the last the value or the position of the last element will not be printed. It just stops just before the last element that we have mentioned. Similarly here, so if you see, the difference is it starts with 250, it starts with the first element, but it goes on just one element before 260, so it stops at 259. So that's the difference between .loc and .iloc. So if you are going to use these two, be sure about what you are going to fetch. So this method would fetch the data including the first as well as the last element, whereas when you use .loc, it doesn't include the last element. It stops just before the last element. So now moving on to, let's say, how to select a range of rows and all columns. So here, so it's very similar to what we have learned in list operation. So when list operation or a string, to select the elements of a string or a list. So here what happens is, so this is for the rows, and then this is specific to the columns. So when we just give an empty colon, it selects all the columns in that particular data frame. And by specifying colon 10, so what happens is it says that the last element is the 10th index. So as you see here, so until 10th index, it prints every single row and all the columns. Now moving on to the conditional selection. So now so far we have seen how to select by specifying the name of the column, the different ways of selecting a particular column in a data frame by using the dot method, as well as by specifying within the square bracket, as well as passing on the specific row numbers that needs to be filtered and selected on the data frame. So now we are going to see how to pass on a condition. So let's say we have a data frame. We want to filter, let's say, people who are aged 50 and above. So we are going to do a filtration not based on name of the column or not based on the index, but we are going to filter based on the value of that particular data frame. In that particular data frame. So in these cases, what we are going to do is we are going to do something like this. So here we have the data frame trend underscore data, and we use dot method, and then we specify is equal to a particular date. So when I execute this, what happens is this would return true whenever there is a matching value that has been found. So here in this case, what's happening is, so this is the this particular date matches with the last element of this particular column, so it has true and everything else is false. So now let's say I'm going to pass this into the .loc method that I already have. So then what happens is this will print only the row where this particular value would return true, which would be the last row. So when I execute this, as you see here, what happens is for the last row, the wheat value is actually matching, so it would return true, and the entire value of the row where the wheat is matching will be printed from this particular data frame. So this is how we select based on a condition. So now let's say instead of equating to a specific condition, we want to see how, like, greater than equal to or less than equal to, when we supply a specific range, how it works. So here we are again using the condition, but what we are saying here is we are saying we want to filter based on the column data science. Whenever the trend store is greater than or equal to 30, you fetch all the rows. So as you see here, you can see the index are being skipped because it is only fetching as all the rows where the condition is being met. So this is how we select a particular we select the values from a data frame based on the condition. And now let's say we want to specify multiple conditions. So ideally, while working on a particular project, we would have a huge data frame with so many attributes. We might have to filter based on various conditions, like maybe by age, by location, or it can be any characteristics that is available about the particular data set. So here in this case, let's see how we can use a filter condition on two different columns and filter the data. So now here when I execute this, so what would happen is it would fetch all the rows where the data science store is greater than or equal to 30, as well as the machine learning trend store is also greater than or equal to 30. So if you see here, every single row here would have the value 30 or more than 30 for these two columns here. So that's how we filter. So here we are using the AND operator, so which means that both of these conditions needs to be satisfied in order for us to fetch the data. So if we use OR operator, which is the pipe, so then what happens is even if one of these conditions is met, so those rows will be fetched. So if I execute this one, so if you see here, so previously when we used the AND operator, there were only 65 rows with 6 columns. So we have only 6 columns in this data set. So when I used OR operator, what happens is that if either of the conditions, like one of those conditions is met, it will be filtered. So if you can see that are about 157 rows that are being retrieved or filtered and 6 columns. So that's how we filter based on a specific value. So now we have covered like picking up a particular column, as well as picking up a particular row of a data set, as well as picking up a combination of column as well as row. Also, we have also covered how to filter data based on a specific condition. So now the other operations are like how to identify various null data. So in our data set, that could be some values that are null. So how do we check for all those things? So now here what I'm using not null. So when I execute this, what happens is whenever a particular row, so here I'm using the data frame trend underscore data, and I'm using the column dot data science, and when I use dot null, this particular column data science in this particular data frame, whenever it is not null, it will be printed. So alternatively, when I say is null, so what would happen is this particular data frame and this particular column data science, if there is any value in this particular column which is null, so then only those rows would be printed. So here in this case, what's happening is there is nothing that is getting printed, which means that this particular column doesn't have any null value in it. So that's how we identify all those null values. So identifying null values is also very important. Maybe in next session or a day or the session after that, we will go into detail about how to identify all the null values and how we can handle them. But for now, it's just enough to know how to identify various null values in a specific column in a data frame. So next one is assigning a particular value. So now let's say we want to assign a particular value. So then what happens is we can use equal to operator and we can pass on the value that needs to be assigned. So here what I am doing is there is no column called as age compute. So here when I mention a name of a column that is not existing and I pass on a value to it. So what happens is if it is not existing, so a new column would be created, and the value 45 will be assigned to that particular column. So here if it has multiple rows, all the rows will be populated by 45 with 45. So if I execute this one and then let's say I'm going to print it, as you see the edge compute column is being added and every single row is populated with the value 45. So what we can do is maybe what you can try out is based on the filtration that we are doing here. So if we assign a value to this one, so what would happen is based on the filtration that we are doing, we can identify a column for those particular selection and what should be the value that should be assigned to that particular column. So this is something that maybe you can try out and see how it is working. And coming on to the final one, let's say we want to change the indexing. So by default, if you see here, the indexing is kind of a new column when we try to write this into a file. So the index will also come along with it. So it will be available as a separate column starting with a 0. So 0 will be assigned to the first row and incremented with 1 with every additional row. So let's say we don't want an additional indexing, but we want to make use of a column that is available in the data set to use it as an index. So then what we can do is we can use the set index, and then we can mention the name of the column that needs to be used as an index. So here the column width is very unique, so there is no duplicates. So what we are going to do is we are going to set the index and we are going to make the column width as an index. So by executing this one, so what happens here is if you can see, width is no longer a separate column of this data frame, whereas width is an index that is being created later. So when we write this into a CSV, there won't be any difference. So this will still be part of the data set that we are going to write, but what happens is instead of having a separate index of 0, 1 and 2 and so on, now the width column is being identified as an index by itself. And that's it about today. So in today's session, what we have covered is we have seen different ways of selecting the data from a data frame, how to identify them based on name of a column, or how to filter by rows or combination of a column as well as rows, and also how to filter based on a condition, and how we do a re-indexing, or how can we change the indexing. So there are few exercises for you to try by yourself. Maybe you can have a track of them, and then it will help you in becoming more comfortable with the various operations on a data frame, which is really important when we start working on the projects, or when we go into the machine learning algorithm, where we have to do a lot of manipulation on the data set. So I hope you have learned something new today. So if you have learned something new, do a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't so far, so that you can join the journey of learning data science in 100 days. If you know someone who would be interested in this one, please share this video with them so that they can also be joined in our journey. That's it for today. See you in a session. Bye.